U.S. airstrikes on Yemen continued as Houthi rebels escalate attacks on vessels in the Red Sea and on Israel. According to Associated Press, a video released by the U.S. Navy showed fighter jets taking off on Wednesday from the USS Harry Truman aircraft carrier in the Red Sea. Earlier this week, U.S. President Donald Trump explicitly linked the actions of the Houthi rebels to the group's main benefactor, Iran. He's warning Tehran that it would suffer the consequences for further attacks by the group. Yemen's Iran-backed Houthi rebels launched 2 missiles at Israel, one early Thursday morning and another in the evening, the military said. Both were intercepted before reaching Israeli airspace, according to the army, and no injuries were reported. Air raid sirens rang out and exploding interceptor rockets were heard in Jerusalem. The U.S. has launched strikes in Sana'a and other cities of Yemen against the rebel group in the past few days, killing more than 50 people. Ukraine and Russia agreed in principle to a limited ceasefire after President Donald Trump spoke with the country's leaders this week, though it remains to be seen when it might take effect and what possible targets would be off-limits to attack. According to Associated Press, the tentative deal to partially rein in the grinding war came after Russian President Vladimir Putin rebuffed Trump's push for a full 30-day ceasefire. The difficulty in getting the combatants to agree not to target one another's energy infrastructure highlights the challenges Trump will face in trying to fulfill his campaign pledge to quickly end the war. After a roughly hour-long call with Trump on Wednesday that both leaders said went well, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenski told reporters that technical talks in Saudi Arabia this weekend would seek to resolve what types of infrastructure would be protected under the agreement. But it was immediately clear that the 3 parties had different views about what the pact entailed, with the White House saying energy and infrastructure would be covered, the Kremlin saying the agreement referred more narrowly to energy infrastructure, and Zelensky saying he'd also like railways and ports to be protected. During their call, Trump suggested that Zelensky should consider giving the U.S. ownership of Ukraine's power plants to ensure their long-term security, according to a White House statement from Secretary of State Marco Rubio and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. Zelensky, though, said the conversation focused on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is the largest of its kind in Europe and has been under Russian control since early in the war. He said Trump posed the idea of an understanding in which the United States can recover the plant. It is possible to modernize it, invest money. We are ready to discuss it with you, said Zelensky in a presidential handout video Thursday, recounting the call with Trump. Zelensky reiterated that Putin is not seriously pursuing peace talks, and wants to prolong battles until he is in a stronger position. He said Putin will not want a ceasefire until Ukrainian troops are pushed out of Russia's Kursk region, and that Russian troops are accumulating to mount a fresh offensive in the east. The call, which Zelensky described as fruitful, came just weeks after a disastrous Oval Office meeting between the 2 leaders that led to Trump temporarily pausing intelligence sharing and military aid to Ukraine.
Була сьогодні у нас достатньо довга, тривала розмова з президентом Трампом, і, чесно кажучи, якщо б не було запланованих інших справ, я думаю, що розмова була б ще довшою. Я вважаю, що вона була предметна. За останній час, напевно, найпредметніша і позитивна. Ми говорили про безпеку енергетики, енергетичної мережі та іншої цивільної інфраструктури. І саме тому я сказав президенту Трампу, що, на мою думку, бажано, щоб ми підготували списки об'єктів, форматів іншого, проти яких ми бачимо не може бути застосована та чи інша далекобійна зброя Росії, тому що ми вважаємо, що ці об'єкти підходять до списку енергетичної інфраструктури та іншої цивільної. Він не хоче, щоб ми залишились хоч навіть одним нашим військовим на території Курської області. Він не хоче припинення вогню, допоки наші війська є на території Курської області. І я в цьому абсолютно впевнений. Третє. Він накопичує війська і хоче вдарити по нас, щоби тиснути на нас сильніше. І так було. І після окупації 2014 року він тиснув на Сході. Це зрозуміла його тактика. Зробити пресинг на всіх напрямках, лякати людей, бити ракетами, тощо лякати, щоб собі дати кращі умови при тому чи іншому форматі закінчення війни. На мою думку, я сказав, що тільки станція цього недостатньо, тому що там повинна бути відповідна інфраструктура, і повинно бути водозабезпечення, і також технічний персонал, і цього дуже багато кроків для того, щоб за 2,5 роки станція почала приносити гроші, приносити те, що вона повинна приносити, електрику, передусім для людей. І оце моє бачення. І президент запитав, а якщо буде розуміння, що Америка може це відновити, я йому сказав так, якщо можна модернізувати, вкладати гроші, тощо, ми готові це обговорювати з вами. Але ми говорили виключно про одну станцію, яка знаходиться під тимчасовою окупацією Росії.
In the Russian armed forces, in the midst of their offensive in the Kursk region, began to have problems in the Belgorod region border area. A number of Z channels wrote in panic about a large-scale breakthrough of the Ukrainian armed forces across the border. Dialogue media outlet found out what actually happened. The informations confirm the intensification of fighting between the Ukrainian defense forces and the Russian armed forces in several areas in the Belgorod region of the Russian Federation. Presumably, the clashes occurred near the villages of Demidovka, Mariino, Prilesyi and Liptsi. The VCHK-OGPU channel, which is associated with the Russian Special Services, claims that the Russian Federation has begun an urgent evacuation of residents of the border village of Krasnaya Yaruga and other settlements in this region. The Ukrainian armed forces filled the ditch right during the day and removed the dragon's teeth. Fighting is underway. It is expected that the Ukrainian armed forces will use reserves at night. If this happens, the situation for the Russian armed forces will become very difficult, the Russian channel wrote. He claims that military special forces of the Russian armed forces were urgently deployed to the area. Another fist strike is expected in the area of the village of Zolochiv, Kharkiv region. The Ukrainian armed forces have amassed significant forces, the Russian resource wrote. Z channel, Northern channel, associated with the Russian army, also expects a more powerful strike by the Ukrainian armed forces. There is still movement on the border. Enemy groups are prowling along the line and are not sitting idle. Small groups are probing our positions and sappers are clearing passages. It does not look like such things are being done for no reason. The enemy is preparing a site and is going to use it, he said. Russian military expert Yan Matveyev, commenting on the intensification of fighting in the Belgorod region, suggested that this is an attempt to pull Russian forces away from the Kursk direction. All this does not look like a full-fledged offensive, but rather a serious diversionary maneuver to force the Russian command to transfer forces from the Kursk region to defend the rest of the border. It is too early to draw serious conclusions, he wrote on Telegram. The statement was made by the head of the Center for Countering Disinformation of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, Andriy Kovalenko. According to him, the fighting is the result of the activity of the Russian forces in this area. The Russians brought troops to the border in Belgorod region. Their sabotage groups were operating. Of course, in such cases, the defense forces act and neutralize the threats, the officer wrote. This information was confirmed by a serviceman of the Ukrainian Armed Forces who anonymously runs a blog called Bakhmut Demon. The Russian sabotage and reconnaissance group tried to enter from the Belgorod side. In response, they received, and ours entered the territory of the Belgorod region. But there is no talk of breaking through the border yet. The Ukrainian Armed Forces soldier assured